Hey there and welcome back to my absolutely snail-paced review of the final season of Stranger Things. And today we're going to be talking about episode 7, The Bridge. Now, the longer the time extends between me watching these episodes and the time when I write these videos, I can't help but slowly get more and more negative as a whole. I think that Volume 1 had some really great content overall and set the second volume up really well. But when we come to Volume 2, I don't know. It just didn't feel the same and a lot more cracks began to show. I don't think it helps that it also starts to look worse once you know how the story ends with the finale as well. Of course, this is going to be a full spoiler review, as there's no way I'm going to just sit here pretending like I haven't watched the entire season, and so let's jump into the episode. It starts off really strong with Max waking up from her coma. After a season filled with trauma and 2 years where Max was stuck inside Vecna's mind and unable to share scenes with the other characters, she's at last back. The music that plays over the top of this scene is excellent, and just the acting from both Max and Lucas is off the charts. I know that sometimes people can get a bit down about the quality of the acting from some of the younger cast members as they've grown up, but these two consistently are putting out some of my favourite performances. It's just the cutest thing ever, and the dialogue is really beautiful. Honestly, after all the shit their relationship's been through across seasons 4 and 5, this really was the ultimate catharsis and perfectly constructed. I also love that they didn't have it all be tears and tissues, and they injected some quality humour into the scene where Max asked Lucas if he'd gotten sick of running up that hill by this point, and all he can do is nod yes. Everybody else comes in and it remains very sweet and wholesome. I just loved all the reunions, although I feel that Max and Eleven probably should have got a more emotional one, right? They became really close friends, and this is what we get? On top of that, I think that Max would be a bit shocked to see Hopper, right? As last she knew, he was dead. This episode already has a runtime of over an hour, so it's not like they couldn't have included just a bit more, you know? Very disappointing. Max asks what happened, and Robin recounts how Mrs. Wheeler destroyed the Demodogs, which prompts Max to say that now Vecna's going to be angry because he knows that both she and Holly escaped. Of course, Holly isn't with them, and Mike asks where she is, which is where the scene shifts over to her. She wakes up in Vecna's lair, and we have a really creepy and disgusting sequence where she looks around and notices all her friends strapped into the cocoon thingy with a living tube attached to their mouths, and realizes this is exactly what's happening to her. It's some real body horror type stuff for me, and she of course has to slowly break out of it, and then she gags and vomits up the particles. Here I think is one of the more complete first looks at Vecna's lair. Before this we'd seen snippets of it, but not the full thing, and it's pretty awesome, and the theme that kicks in here really helps set the scene. What I liked here is that Holly isn't an idiot. She doesn't stand around gawking forever. She takes a quick look, and as soon as she sees that Vecna's there, she books it out of there. She only stops after that because instead of the upside down she expected, where Max had explained it would be like her home but more horrible or whatever, she finds herself in a completely different plane of existence with no idea where the hell she should go. Anybody would hesitate there. However, once she notices that Vecna's waking up and is about to come after her, then she's instantly running away again. I do love when characters react to horror elements in a really rational way, you know? We go from this to the upside down inside the lab where Jonathan's trying in vain to barge down a wall. Eventually he listens to Nancy to stop, as he'll just end up hurting himself, which is when Steve and Dustin start smashing down a wall with a fire extinguisher. I really enjoyed this scene. When Nancy climbs through the hole they made and Dustin just immediately envelops her in this big bear hug, I loved it because it makes it feel like these are characters who have known each other for years and years, and who would actually be really distressed at the idea of losing one another. On top of that, Nancy and Dustin have had a lot of cute little moments like this over the years, and I like that they got this final one. I also found it funny in the background of this to see Jonathan and Steve's awkward interaction where Steve's helping him out of the hole. Here, Dustin begins to somewhat explain the exotic matter, and he tells them that he's still working through Dr. Brenner's notes, which were oh so conveniently in the lab and hadn't degraded, unlike a lot of other things within the Upside Down over the years. It also gives them all the answers, and luckily Dustin is apparently smart enough to figure it out rather quickly. I mean, this has got to be some pretty complex shit, right? And he's figuring it out on the fly in a high pressure situation. He tells Nancy that Holly is somewhere other than the Upside Down, and then we cut over to the girl of the hour to see her continued escape attempt from the abyss. She keeps running, only to trip and fall over a bit of unstable ground, which sends her flying. When she recovers, she crawls over to it and is able to see past that into the red membrane, which makes her think about what Max said. Hawkins was splitting in two. So she pulls at the stone, and here we see that Vecna is slowly walking towards her, and I will say this had me tense, and I was jumping and yelling at my TV at the first watch through. She goes back to trying to pull, and then she looks up again, and he's even closer than he was before. It's just some excellent tension building and gets you on the edge of your seat thinking, well, surely they wouldn't have her escape only to be immediately caught again, right? But at the same time, how can you be so sure? So she slides through the membrane gateway, and whoopsie, gravity, as the abyss is the roof of the Upside Down, and so she starts falling back down to Earth. This is all overheard by Nancy and the others in the lab, and they begin to run to the roof as we see Holly falling ever closer to the ground. Man, it's pretty lucky that she escaped right above Hawkins' lab, right? What are the chances of that? All of this serves as the mother of all cliffhangers coming into the opening credits. Of course, in true Stranger Things fashion, do we follow up with this nail-biter of a storyline? No, we do not. Instead, when we return to the show, it's back in Hawkins, but this time we follow up with Mr. Clark, Erica, and Murray, who for the last 6 hours have been building a telemetry tracker to let them triangulate the location of Dustin within the Upside Down. It's a very low-key and silly storyline, and thus I guess serves as a nice cooldown after the pretty heavy opening minutes. Each character's in a separate location in Hawkins, holding a bunch of balloons each with a tracker with which they intend to to triangulate the location. It's a very goofy visual, but I actually think it works. We're heading ever closer to the endgame where things are going to get a lot darker, and thus you need to take these moments of levity where you can find them. I also love that they were using Voyager codenames for this instead of just their names when it would have been much easier to do so. Murray, of course, is impatient and demands that instead of doing this, they should cut their losses, hop in the van, and start driving. This conveniently gives Mr. Clark an idea: to loose the balloons, which will in turn allow each of them to get a better signal. Each of them gets a coordinate, and so Mr. Clark runs off to do the calculations to determine where Dustin is. I really love that Mr. Clark's actually getting involved in the storyline this season. He's always been such a fun character and really important for the party to figure out specific concepts and ideas, and so now he finally gets to see it all for himself. It just feels really earned, you know? We cut to Will sitting on the bed at Hopper's house and having flashbacks to how he was overpowered by Vecna and forced to give up Max's location. Joyce comes in and tells him that Hopper radioed to tell them Max was safe and that everything was going to be okay, but of course, Will disagrees. He says that if Lucas is right, then this is the day that Vecna's going to act, as it's the anniversary of the day that Will himself was taken way back in season 1. He talks about how he thought he'd be able to overpower Vecna, but in the end, he never really stood a chance. He starts to buy into what Vecna said to him about being weak, and then brings up the fact that he's the one who did the tunneling back in the gap between seasons 1 and 2. For me, this is something I'll never really understand. Why does he keep honing in on these tunnels? It is by far one of the least bad things he had to do when he was under the power of the hive mind. I mean, think of all those people that he killed. Poor old Bob got mauled, and he tried to choke out Joyce when they were trying to cleanse him of the influence of the particles. How is any of that less traumatic than this idea that he dug the tunnels using the vines as he slept? To me, it's a very weird fixation that they're treating this as a massive story revelation when I just don't think it matters all that much. Joyce tries to tell him that this isn't his fault and that Vecna won't win as Holly's now free, and she'll be able to tell them where the other kids are, which will allow them to try to launch a rescue mission. Despite her assurances though, Will bursts into tears and tells her that she's wrong and that it's all his fault. I don't really know what to think about this scene. I just don't think it was very interesting overall, and it really just hones in on this strange issue that Will has about the tunnels. I know that technically it's even more than that, but I just didn't find it interesting, and the slow plotting delivery did not help. Returning to the hospital storyline, we see that a bunch of soldiers have turned up there, presumably to deal with the disturbance and the reports of a demo attack. Vicky's walking along the corridors, clearly on edge, as she knows that they're all still hiding in the basement having a chat, instead of doing the more obvious thing and trying to get out there pronto, as they could be swarmed any minute, either by soldiers or by Vecna again. Max literally said he'd be angry. Why would he just give up? It doesn't even make much sense. Surely he didn't only have this small handful of creatures he could use. Send some of the more unstoppable big boys. Them just sitting there talking is very silly and it makes no sense. Regardless, this is what they're doing. Max tells them that when she was with Holly, she figured that wherever Vecna was keeping her body, it had to be within the Upside Down. Thus, she told Holly that she needs to go back to the Wheeler house when she wakes up and hide there until they come to find her. Therefore, the team has to try to get back into the Upside Down to try to save her, which is when Erica makes contact and Lucas goes off to speak to her. We don't see that part though, and instead stay with the main group, who are all going through ideas on how they can get back inside. Mike suggests going back through the Max since there should be very few soldiers, considering they were only just massacred by Vecna 2 days or so before. Hopper squashes that idea by saying they would have brought in reinforcements by this point, which prompts Elle to suggest that she simply breaks through the plate using her powers. This is when Mrs. Wheeler joins the conversation, incredulously asking whether Holly's trapped underneath a steel plate. How is that even possible though? Wasn't her throat pretty much slit by the Demogorgon? I'm already suspending my disbelief enough that she was able to trick and kill all those Demodogs, but how is she healed enough to hold a conversation and even raise her voice? When she was with Mike and Nancy, which was only a couple of days before, was it not made very clear it would be some time until she could speak again? Maybe they thought that the scene wouldn't be all that compelling if she was almost completely mute? So they scramble to try to explain the concept of the Upside Down to Mrs. Wheeler, and also, she doesn't seem too shocked that Hopper's alive suddenly either. Lucas rejoins the team and lets them know that they've found Dustin and the others, before Vicky finally comes in with a wheelchair, letting them know that the soldiers are on their way. So at long last, they make their way out of the hospital, but of course Mrs. Wheeler is struggling to walk. Mike tries to ask if she's okay, but she shushes him and calls him Michael. I do love those little touches, you know? You don't see all that many scenes of the Wheeler family interacting as a unit, so having these sorts of moments help you buy into it, I guess. Mrs. Wheeler obviously doesn't want to be left behind because her daughter's still out there, and she wants to be able to go and save her, as well as protect her other children in case there are more monsters. Seeing this sort of does actually make me kind of sad, to tell you the truth. I feel like Karen as a character would have made for a really fun and interesting addition to the story much earlier on, and would have helped with both the arcs of Nancy and Mike in that way. In the end, he's able to convince her to trust in him, and that he'll be able to bring Holly back to her, and she goes back to her bed to rest and recover. This was a great scene for me. Like I said earlier, I don't really think that we get enough scenes with the Wheeler family interacting, and each one is a treat. We skip ahead to the team arriving at the old Hawkins lab to meet up with Murray, Mr. Clark, and Erica, who found Dustin, but by the time they arrived, the signal had gone cold. After a brief reaction shot from Erica, where she notices that Max is awake and with them, they get the signal again, and Dustin briefly makes contact and tells them that they found Holly in the Upside Down. This leads to the group all heading over towards one of the metal plates, and Al destroys the camera and opens up one of the rifts into the Upside Down. I like that they didn't beat around the bush here. They quickly got got right into the thick of it and weren't bogged down, which I do think becomes more of an issue the longer we go through the episodes. It all really slows down, so I like that they get into the Upside Down and find the group fairly quickly. We also learned what happened to Holly after she started falling through the sky. She's immediately caught by Vecna and held in the air long enough for Nancy to see her, and then is taken again. I do wonder though, if Vecna was able to grab her like this at such a huge distance without being able to see where she was due to the clouds and whatnot, why didn't he simply use his powers to grab her when she was running away from him in the abyss? Was he just trying to be dramatic or something? Beyond that, I know that ultimately Holly needed to be one of the vessels for Vecna's plan to work, but did anybody else find her immediately getting captured so deeply anticlimactic? You build up to her escaping across numerous episodes, and then she gets out and within one or two scenes she's right back to where we started. It just feels really frustrating, you know? I honestly think it would have been more interesting to see Vecna realize that without one of his vessels, he needs to change tactics and launch a proper attack with demos and his Mind Flayer, and for the final battle to be inside the Upside Down. I mean, that's the place that held the most story relevance to begin with, as opposed to a completely different planet that ultimately doesn't really matter, you know? More and more, I just find myself completely dissatisfied with the latter stages of the story. From here, we enter yet another scene that feels so disappointing. Kay and that soldier dude go take a look at Sullivan, who's been treated after he was severely burnt by Vecna. He tells them about Vecna and his power over the monsters, and it feels like this would be a chance for it to turn into a bit of a faction war. There could be our heroes, Vecna's army, and then the military trying to find both 11 but also kill Vecna. Instead, it seems that Kay doesn't believe Vecna exists or doesn't care, and she blames all of it on Al. It's just absurd! If she knows about 11 and Carly, wouldn't there have been a record of Henry too? A record of why Brenner created the Upside Down to begin with and what he was trying to achieve with it? To find Henry? It's just weird because it makes Kay seem so stupid and utterly waste a character that could have been extremely useful and interesting in the endgame. In the end, this whole subplot is a massive bust, and I think it heavily detracts from the second volume. Part of me thinks it would have been better if Vecna straight up killed all of them during Sorcerer and just swept them from the board straight away. The problem is they needed them around for Al's ending, even if, like I said in a previous video, the idea of them being able to track Al when they can't even catch her in Hawkins is utterly absurd. Over at the Squawk, Will and Joyce arrive and meet up with all the rest of them, and Will and Max have a full-on reunion scene. It feels kind of weird though, because it really didn't seem like they were all that close back in previous seasons, you know? Al barely got any time with her, and I feel like Dustin would have also been an interesting choice, but Will? Also, on top of that, there is no Joyce and Jonathan reunion, even though her son was missing in the Upside Down where there are monsters on the loose. It just makes him feel so much lesser and disconnected from so many storylines. Lucas takes Max inside and shows her around and tells her how they came into possession of the radio station as their base and tries to make her smile, but all she can think about is Holly and how she's alone back in Camzots with Vecna. That she'd been so sure she would have been able to escape, and yet she didn't. She expresses regret for coming back to Hawkins and thinks she should have stayed in Camzots with Holly to keep her safe until somebody could rescue them. Lucas tells her though that seeing as she'd been inside Vecna's mind, she's going to be a crucial element when it comes to defeating him. I really like this little moment here, as Max and Holly's growing bond had been one of my favourite elements of the season so far. Having her feel pain that her new little friend has been left behind and now has nobody on her side to protect her is just really cute and wholesome. Dustin joins the conversation and tells the pair that he knows where Holly is, but he isn't sure how they're going to get there. Here is where we get the first of our sit-down expositional scenes of the episode, where all the characters sit around while one of them monologues, with the other sometimes cutting in with questions or quips. I know that a lot of people are pretty negative on these types of scenes, and I will admit that they can be somewhat tedious at times, but at the same time, I think this one is massively necessary. All our characters need to understand what the hell's going on and what they have to do. Dustin's reveal that the Upside Down isn't the end game and that instead it's merely a gateway to another planet is some pretty key information that all characters need to be aware of, and on top of that, the scene also allows them to understand what Vecna's planning. This is kind of what happens when you have a bunch of different storylines and characters that are separated for so long and they have to come back together. You need these types of scenarios so that the information can be shared, even if it is a little bit frustrating seeing as you already know it because you've been with each group of characters the entire time. Dustin reveals the nature of the Upside Down and how it was created as a way to get to Henry by Brenner with Al's help. That being said, I still don't really get how the hell she was able to use her powers to find him when he was so far across space, whilst more recently, she was completely unable to even find him with the tank, despite the fact that there's now a gateway. I'm also a little bit confused as to how Brenner managed to make that gateway to begin with. Regardless, Dustin concludes that the demos, the vines, and everything else spooky they've faced is from the abyss, and Max is able to tell them that Henry wants to merge these worlds. From here, Will concludes that Vecna was likely weakening the abyss in the time since his defeat at the end of season 4 to allow the two worlds to merge using his vessels who can amplify his own powers like we saw with his possession of Will back in the day. All in all, it's actually a pretty interesting scene. I think it's just that people were fatigued by this type of exposition by the end. Hopper then says that they need a plan, and we cut away to Vecna, who has returned to his kindly Henry form and has taken Holly back to his house in Camzots. He carries her upstairs to bed and then goes down to talk to the rest of the kids to inform them about what's happened. He tells them that Holly's been manipulated by Max, who is actually a monster in disguise who is working for the Black Thing. He claims that Holly now believes that he kidnapped them and that he wants to end the world. I have to say, his acting in this part is so good. He seems genuinely hurt that she'd mistrust him, and yet also acts the responsible adult by framing Holly as a victim. When Thomas calls Holly stupid as shit, he intervenes and says she isn't stupid. She's simply been corrupted by a powerful monster. He then continues to play the voice voice of reason when Derek suggests that maybe they should all just give up and go home. The kids then turn on Derek, but he begs them not to fight amongst themselves. I have to say that you also got to give credit to Derek here, by the way. Even though he's scared shitless about their last encounter, and he's not willing to fully go against him now to protect his family, at the same time he does try suggesting this. Who knows how Henry could have reacted to it after all? However, instead of taking it as a challenge, he plays the woe is me card, looking all sad and lamenting that perhaps the Black Thing has defeated him and he's failed. This in turn gets the kids to go along with what he wants, and that is to try to talk some sense into Holly, or at least force her to go along with them. They all then start chanting back to the light like cultists, and we zoom in on Henry beginning to smile. The scene was so absurdly powerful and well constructed, and really helped to continue to forge Henry into such an insidious threat. I really wish they'd use much more of him across the season, to be honest, because he does go missing for large chunks. He's a far more compelling villain than the military, and his scenes always hit so hard. Even knowing how it all ends up for him, he's still so fun to watch. The same cannot be said for the military characters. Every single time I see them, I'm shaking my head. I mean, in the first watch through, this dude hunting Al talking about how she's getting sloppy and planning how he's going to lead a team inside the Upside Down, right as we know our heroes are going to be in there to fight off Vecna, was really interesting. Hell, in isolation, I think if his death was doubled up with K's, as in they both go down into the lab with a big force and Al, Carly, Hopper, and Murray take them out together, that would have been ideal, but it's not what happens in the end, and so now on a rewatch, these scenes don't hit anywhere near as hard as I want them to. I will admit though that this dude has a top tier crazy guy face / crazy eyes. I think he would have been a far better main human antagonist for the military, as it's satisfying when he gets his, you know? I think they should have had Sullivan be the main bad at first, who's then killed by Vecna, and this dude arrives with this squad and finds everybody else dead and assumes it was Al leading the monsters, leading to their final confrontation where she executes him. It wasn't to be though, and that's such a shame. We then return to the Squawk for the next sit down and explain things scene where they all try to come up with a plan. Hopper has the very, very terrible idea of fighting their way into the base within the Upside Down and stealing the helicopter that's there. They would then force a pilot to fly it for them, and in turn, this would allow them to enter the abyss through a rift. No idea what Hop was smoking when he came up with this idea, or why Murray is so invested in it either. It's an objectively shit plan, as aside from the gateway at the Mac, all the other rifts are small, and you'd have to enter Rota first. It just seems so needlessly risky in that way, although at the same time, I can also see why he suggests it. There doesn't seem like there's any other options. This turns into a blow-up largely between Dustin and Hopper, which in turn gives time for Steve to actually get a moment where he can come up with a big plan. He declares that they don't need a magic bean to get Vecna, because they already have a beanstalk in the form of the radio tower. As Vecna begins to draw the worlds closer together, they can climb the tower on the Upside Down and enter the abyss, save the kids, whilst Al can go inside Vecna's mind and start to fight him there to buy them time. Whilst Al believes she wouldn't be able to find Henry's mind because he's too far away, Nancy tells them that in the Upside Down, everything from Brenner's experiments is still there, which includes the bath that Al used to be put inside. Thus, they should be able to use it to attack Henry, with Max and Carly volunteering to help her too. Carly then starts talking about how they can end their brother together, which always felt so weird to me. Why does she consider him a brother? Were they close at the lab? Back in Al's flashbacks, he more felt like a friendly employee rather than one of the experiments. It just felt so weird for her to keep calling him brother, to the point that a lot of people thought that Henry was going to have been revealed to have been messing with her mind when she was stuck in the base, and thus she was turned to his side. It's not what ended up happening at the end, but I do get why people would think it. After all, she does act very suspiciously. She's calling him brother all the time, and also continually trying to tell Al that the only way they can have true peace is if Al kills herself. To finish off the scene, Dustin suggests they drop a bomb to destroy the exotic matter as they leave, which would in turn destroy the Upside Down and cut them off from the abyss forever. At the same time though, it feels like they're playing a risky game, right? After all, what if the destruction of the Upside Down went funky and took them all with it? Like destroying Hawkins / Earth 2. No idea if that would actually be possible, but I guess they wouldn't know either, would they? Dustin is literally just working off a notebook that he wouldn't be able to fully understand by this point. I feel like it would take more than a single day for him to be able to figure it all out. It seems like such a half-baked plan, and whilst I get that they're out of time and options, surely it's still a concern, right? From here we return to Camzots for the creepiest scene yet with these kids. Holly wakes up screaming, only to be comforted by her best friend. That's all well and good, but then the camera pans to reveal that all the other kids are just standing there at the foot of the bed, staring at her like some demented demon children from a horror film. The scene knows it too, because the music is extremely creepy, and they all say, "Welcome," at the same time. How the hell could these kids possibly think this would put her mind at ease? She asks where Henry is, and this spirals into an argument where all the kids who have bought into Henry's Mr. Watson persona are telling her that her mind's been twisted and that Max is a monster, whilst Holly's trying to tell them the truth, but of course it's no good. She attempts to get Derek to go along with her and reveal the truth, but of course he's not willing to help her because he's scared for his family. I don't blame him for that either. It would be tough to stand up to Henry here. This is where the scene gets crazy though. She starts playing along as if she's suddenly having an epiphany that they're all right and Mr. Watson's a hero, only for her to pick up her little CD player she had, turn, and smack her friend Mary right in the head before she charges out and tries to escape. That's a bit of an escalation. The others then begin to swarm her, and in the chaos, they accidentally throw her down the stairs. I thought it was eventually going to be revealed that the kids were somewhat possessed when they were doing this to her, but in the end, I don't think they ever state that. So they were all just behaving like freaks for no real reason at all. It's so weird, isn't it? We cut away to Al lifting the crash truck up for Murray, whilst in the meantime, Hopper vents to Joyce about how he doesn't trust Carly at all. Fair enough too. I think on my first watch through, I was a little weirded out how he goes 0 to 100 about Carly from just one conversation that she had with Al about Kay's true motives, but on the rewatch, you can see how she well and truly worms her way into Al's head with this defeatist attitude. So when Hopper's talking about how if Carly makes one wrong move, he's going to kill her, whilst it did make me raise my eyebrows initially, at the same time, I can also somewhat understand. That being said, it's so frustrating to me that even by this point in the penultimate episode, Hopper still clearly doesn't think that Al can do this, and also deflects from that point. I get that it's due to his own trauma of losing Sarah, but I just think that these are story beats that would have been better resolved by this stage of the story, especially since they end up separated forever at the end. Thus, I think it would have been more satisfying to see them have more wholesome sequences instead of so much mistrust and distance. That being said, I guess it was cute to have another scene of him and Joyce. From here, we return to the Squawk for yet another scene of Will and Max. It's a really surprising pair that they're focusing on here, to tell you the truth. After all, they were never really characters that shared much dialogue in the past. It's just rather odd. Max is wheeled into the room by Vicky and says that trying to understand all the science stuff gives her a headache, and thus she has to trust in the nerds. I feel like this is such a fun audience surrogate moment. For a lot of the stuff in the show in regards to this type of thing, you pretty much always just have to nod your head as the likes of Dustin spouts his jargon and assume that they're going to be right. Hell, you don't even have any idea as to whether the actual science holds up, you just have to trust in these characters. At this point, the two enter a little discussion as to how they both feel useless. Max wants to be able to help them fight in the abyss, but the fact that she only just woke up from a coma means that that's not possible at this stage. However, Will tells her that while she can't be there, she's still going to be extremely useful in getting Al into Vecna's mind and finding the kids / attacking Vecna. Meanwhile, Will feels like he's not even fit to do that because he thinks that if he goes near the hive mind again, there's a chance that Vecna could take control of him and somehow use him to hurt his friends. After all, that's what happened last time when Vecna forced him to spy. I would argue that there is a difference though. The only reason Vecna could take control of him to begin with was because Will forced his way into Vecna's mind specifically and started attacking him. If Vecna's preoccupied fighting Al and Carly in his mindscape, then Will should be safe to enter the abyss, as after all, he would be very useful for killing demos with his powers. This scene should have been the first clue that the finale fight was going to end up feeling rather lackluster, and they wouldn't end up fighting anything except the Mind Flayer. I saw in the documentary that they made that some of the writers thought the audience would have demo fatigue by this point, which is just completely bizarre. Imagine if there were no orcs in the Lord of the Rings Return of the King's final battle, because Peter Jackson felt by that point in the story, the audience would be tired of the orcs. It's bizarre, and thus this also is bizarre. In isolation, it's a decent scene, but the fact that they stop addressing that Will is the only character who can kill Demogorgons outside of Al, who is not going to be there in the abyss, was such a bad sign in hindsight. Will asks how Max managed to survive in Henry's mind at all this time, and it's revealed that it was mostly luck. She found the cave and discovered it was linked to a memory that Henry found to be traumatic, and so he was completely unwilling to face it to get to her. This led to her to conclude that he was underneath it all still a human, which I think is a big turning point for Will's character. It's where he realizes that he has to face his fears in order to help the party, which in turn leads to his coming out scene towards the end of the episode, and also plants the seeds within him of thinking that maybe Henry can be reasoned with, or his fear can be exploited, as we see in the finale. From here, we get a brief preparation scene with all our champions in the basement of the Squawk. We see that Mike's managed to build a bomb that will seemingly be powerful enough to destroy the exotic matter and with it the Upside Down, and have a fun little scene where Robin argues with him on the choice of music he selected. They've rather cleverly decided to have a bomb on a timer that's linked to the record that's going to be playing, and here we get some fun low-stakes banter as each argues their case as to why their choice is the right one. It's a fun little sequence that reminds me very much of when Mike and Nancy were infiltrating the hospital to speak to their mum, and argued about the limp he was faking as he pretended to be a patient. Salty Mike arguing with his friends and family in this low-stakes way is when he's at his peak for me, and Robin was a great character to do this with. We move on to Nancy snatching a gun out of Steve's hands as she feels like he has no experience with it, and he'd be a liability. After all, as he says, he only has experience with BB guns, air rifles, and of course, duck hunt. So he's not exactly trustworthy with the gun, but I do question that if they had all these guns to begin with, why wouldn't they all be practicing or getting some training from Hopper? After all, they know that Vecna's still out there, and he rather famously sends demos into the real world to attack people. Being able to use guns would probably be high on the agenda, right? Dustin goes and pulls Steve off into a side room to fetch the spears that he and Eddie used back in season 4. Dustin takes one and offers the other to Steve, showing that Dustin's moved on from their clash that had been bubbling across the entirety of the season until last episode. This whole scene was just so cute and wholesome. Steve apologizes for the things that he said and how he'd been acting, and he reveals that in the end he acted that way because things were different, and he missed his best friend, which in turn caused him to lash out. He and Dustin hug, and Dustin takes back everything he said about Steve being an idiot. It's also really cute that he'd been clearly dwelling on that line mocking Steve's intelligence in the lab. I have to say that their random team up during season 2's well and truly paid dividends, hasn't it? I don't think it's really something you could have predicted for either character during season 1, and yet it's somehow become one of the most enduring and powerful friendships and and dynamics in the show's history. They finished the scene with a pledge that if you die, I die, which immediately made it clear to me that neither one of them was getting killed, although it's not like it felt like any of the leads were ever at risk in the end. I just don't think it's that sort of show. It's a great scene here, and then we springboard into a brief scene where Mr. Clark gets the gate signal to get into the Mac, so they'll be able to get into the Upside Down with their truck and get all the places they need to go in time. This scene in turn transitions into one with Carly and Al, where Al tries to be optimistic about how they can destroy Kay's lab and then kill Kay so they can both live free. Carly though says that in the end there will always be a new Kay and they always gonna hunt her, and eventually they will find her, they'll kill Mike, take her blood and create new children just like them. Basically it seems like a battle of the optimist versus the defeatist, and whilst at the time I didn't mind these scenes, even though a lot did hate them, in the end knowing how it wraps up I find it such bullshit that Carly's perspective is shown to be the right one, the one that Al goes with. It's such a depressing note to end things on, right? Also, my god, imagine telling your supposed sister that you think the world would be better off if she commits suicide, and then in the end she goes with what you say, and it's framed as a positive. Yeah, her fate is ambiguous, but she's never going to contact her friends or family ever again, and so she is as good as dead in that case. What were the Duffers thinking with this? My god. Murray gets the truck working again, and the party begin to load up their weapons and gear, during which time Will approaches Joyce and asks whether he can speak to her about what happened to him in Vecna's mind. He sits her down, and here I was thinking, okay, he's going to come out to his mum. Jonathan pretty much already knew, I think, if we were reading those scenes from season 4 correctly, and so it would make sense that he fears the rejection of his mum above all else, especially since it was referenced during season 1 that his dad used to call him slurs. Obviously, it would be really frightening to potentially lose the only parental figure he has left, and thus it seems like he was going to take Robin's advice and tell one person to begin with, and then over time keep opening it up to others like she's doing. On my first watch through, I was really invested in this scene. Will talks about how to defeat Vecna he needs to be able to exploit his fears, but to do that, he in turn has to reveal his own secrets so that Vecna can't manipulate him into thinking that his friends and family will abandon him for being gay. Just as we're getting somewhere with it, Mike comes in, and so I figured, okay, maybe he's going to come out to his mum and maybe the OG party, and that's going to be it. Until it's revealed that he's coming out to everybody except for Hopper because, of course, he isn't there yet. I know a lot of people really hate this scene. I think they felt it went too long and was unnecessary and weird. I don't necessarily agree though. His coming out felt like a true step in his character development, and it didn't go too long. There have definitely been longer scenes that I've cared way less about. I think it's more that you have the likes of Murray and Vicky at his coming out that does make it feel weird. How could they possibly be that close, you know? For me, that's what makes it strange and feel a bit off, but really nothing else. I think they just needed a tighter, more focused group for the scene, but I liked everything else about it. I loved his coming out monologue about how he explains that Vecna showed him that slowly distanced themselves from him and abandoned him, and how he's exactly the same person as he was before. I thought it was just really cute and emotional, and even though it was a little cheesy to have them all one by one declare how they'd always stand by him and he'd never lose them, it was still really sweet. Also, Jonathan giving him kisses on the cheek? Adorable. I don't know, I guess I just think that the hate was overblown for this one, and it's not nearly as bad as people were making it out to be. He then declares that if they're going to have any chance of surviving, he has to come with them into the abyss, which is when we move into the beginning of the plan. It's a very action movie sequence, almost to a ridiculous degree. They charge at the gates of the military compound, and Erica and Mr. Clark use the signal to get them inside. They start shooting at Murray in the cab of the truck, but he just keeps going with ease, as they have stormtrooper aim, whilst Hopper's able to somehow get the drop on all of them and kick their asses with his superior skills. So much for special forces. Nancy then pops out of the top of the trailer and kills a bunch of soldiers whilst also just being a sitting duck. Also, my god, it's crazy how none of them really value life at this stage. I get that Al and Hopper have killed before, but now Nancy? She just doesn't care? Slaughtering them like it's nothing at all? It feels so jarring. She and Hopper literally laugh and smile about it afterwards. It feels so weird. They end up making it through the gate and we have a shot of all of them preparing before we cut back to Henry as he and the kids have their little seance thingy where he powers them all up to begin the merging of the worlds. This one really did make me laugh though because it's so obviously evil to the point that he isn't even trying anymore. It looks like he's summoning demons. He already knows he has them, I guess. This is where the episode ends and yeah, it was a mixed bag again. There's moments of greatness to be had and some of the more hated moments definitely feel a bit overblown to me, but then there's a lot of duds too. You can 100% see the writing getting weaker over time leading to the finale, and a lot of it's made worse by knowing where it all leads. With all that being said though, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? Did you like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.